absolute pleasure to be your host today. I'm calling in from Dubai. I'm a native of New Zealand, latterly of Sydney, and when there was A380s flying around, back and forth most weeks, 42 weeks between Sydney and Dubai. But I've been here during COVID for the last year, and it's all well and good. Winter time, it's below 50 degrees. I'd like to briefly introduce our panel today to discuss rethinking your supply chain. The esteemed panel, I might add, from all over the world. There's no doubt you've seen on other panels in this fantastic event by SAPEX. So top left-hand side, Justin Goldston. Justin, Professor of Project and Supply Chain Management at Penn State. Thanks for joining us, and that's at Penn State University in the US, of course. Down to the bottom, on the left-hand side, MJ Schumacher, and MJ is SAPEX Director and GM New Ways Limited in South Africa. So she's the local on the panel today. Welcome, MJ, and welcome, Justin.
Thank you.
Top right-hand corner, Mark Morley. Mark, you're in the UK, Mark, correct?
Yeah, I'm based just outside London in the UK.
Today, yeah, good stuff. So reasonable hours for you, Director of Product Marketing at OpenText in the UK. And as with Justin, we've got another US national here, Thomas Goldsby. Thomas, thanks for joining us. And Thomas is James A. Haslam, the second chair of logistics at Haslam College of Business in the University of Tennessee.
That's correct.
Down south. Hey,
so welcome from Knoxville, Tennessee.
Yeah, awesome. Fantastic. Bit of an early morning for you chaps.
It is.
Yes, it is.
Ready to go.
Dedication to the cause. Fantastic. Okay, well, thanks, everybody. And just a few house rules. If anybody wants to go to the toilet, that will be over to the right-hand side of your room. Sorry, just had to throw that in. So New Zealand sense of humour. So what we're going to do today, folks, is for everybody watching us, joining the panel here, please participate. I'll be keeping an eye on questions, and we will be running probably 20, 25 minutes with the panel, with a series of questions. And, of course, if you've got comments, questions, opinions, please put them to us. And if there's anybody in particular you'd like to respond to, then let us know about that, and we'll make sure that the panelists, according to your question, will respond. Other than that, I'll be randomly arbitrary about it. Very good. So look, let's kick off. Justin, no, I'm gonna go with Thomas. So Thomas, you and I had a bit of a conversation before the event here today, and I know that you've been working a lot on process around responding to the incredible situation that we've found ourselves in over the last 12 months, incredibly good and incredibly bad, different places, different times for different folks. I'd like you to set the scene for us a little bit, please, if you wouldn't mind, just around what impact on process in the supply chain that the last 9-10 months has had on us.
Yeah, certainly. And thank you, Kim, and thanks to the organizers for this opportunity to be with you today. So there's certainly, I think we first have to acknowledge that this is a crisis situation. There's no way around that, but hopefully help is on the way in the form of vaccine. But what I do find is that it does present considerable opportunity to make changes that many organizations have been wanting to make for quite some time, whether it's that big technology investment or reorg or what have you. And as Rahm Emanuel, former chief of staff to President Obama here in the United States some years back, said, it's a shame to let a good crisis go without seizing it. And I think that many organizations are seeing that opportunity. With regard to process, there's certainly, we tend to think about what we do with process. And the area that we've identified in our research here at the University of Tennessee that presents tremendous opportunity is not so much what we do in terms of execution, but what we do in the way of planning. And particularly given the erratic nature of demand that we've experienced, there's been a premium placed on agility. And a lot of focus typically on agility is around the structural things that you might do, changes to your supply chain infrastructure, if you will, sources of supply, points of production, points of distribution. And certainly you can implement those kinds of changes, but the urgency with which this crisis landed in our laps and at first kind of shut down demand, and then in many organizations we saw such a resurgence that they just could not readily address it. We found that the planning process is the one that calls for maybe the most immediate attention, the one that can generate an immediate impact. And what I'm talking about in the way of the planning process is shortening planning horizons and increasing the planning cadence. So a lot of companies operate on a 4-week or 1-month planning cadence, and that's simply just too long in light of what we've seen. If companies can take 1 week out or even 2 weeks out of that planning cycle, increase the pace and cadence of their planning, they're much more likely to hit the target. Forecasting is always going to be bad. We all know that. But the way we've been trying to shoot an arrow is like almost like we're on horseback, just racing down a path and then trying to hit a target. And if you can just kind of bring that target closer, right a little bit closer, if you will, to that target, you're much more likely to hit it. So we're recommending that companies try to adjust their planning cycles in terms of the horizon and the cadence in hopes of missing a little less poorly, less badly than they might otherwise.
Okay. Well, thanks for that, Thomas. Other panelists want to weigh in on that particular subject? Want to give us any views on that? Justin, I see you nodding up and down there.
Yeah. So I agree with Thomas in that he made an excellent point in that organizations had to be agile. We had to, or organizations had to do a lot of pivoting, during this time. And I just had a peer-reviewed journal article published within the International Supply Chain Technology Journal where I surveyed traditional supply chain project teams that were on site at customers pre-COVID and then transitioned to a virtual environment during the pandemic. And I asked them 3 questions. I asked them, okay, what is going well during the pandemic? What did not go so well? And what approaches were implemented that can be transferable to a post-COVID-19 environment whenever that happens? So the interesting findings were that the individual said that uncertainty management planning is going to be transferable post-COVID. So uncertainty management planning can be defined as we're planning for those current state process, those current state events that may occur, as opposed to this risk management planning. So I always say that supply chain disruptions are cyclical. We have in the U.S. we have forest fires almost every year in California. We have hurricanes. We have earthquakes. You have tsunamis within the APAC region. So we have those things that are uncertain that we have to plan for, as opposed to those risks where we have a project where we know that okay, we're implementing this ERP system during our busy season. Okay, Justin is going to the SAPIX conference next year in South Africa. Hint, hint. So we have to plan for that. So there's a difference between uncertainty management planning versus risk management planning. And I think that you're going to see more organizations planning for the current state, the uncertainty within the current state, what we refer to as the unknown unknowns, as opposed to the known unknowns, which in the future state are in risk planning. So I mean that goes back to the process. I know I was going to talk about the people, but I think that I've pivoted and said, yeah, the process is indeed very important, but I think that you're also going to see more organizations adopting agile processes as well, because the pivoting during the uncertainty has been very important and has been proven to be vital for the success of organizations. And just building on that, I think Justin and Thomas both highlighted the importance of agility. I've heard words flexibility, adaptability,
And I think, to be honest, I read a report back in March from Deloitte, for example. They described it, and many others have described this as a black swan event. It's going to force the hand of supply chain leaders, logistics directors to restructure their networks, maybe bring manufacturing closer to home, shorten those logistics networks. And I think it's a case of, if companies don't adapt, they're not going to survive. They have to restructure their supply chains and the back end infrastructure to support those as well.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I think, I don't know if you saw the keynote opening of this morning by John, but he actually painted quite a nice picture of what the future looks like and how we have to try and manage it. And, you talk about which products have flat demand, which ones are seasonality, but we're actually not going to know much of that in the future. And Thomas, you mentioned forecasting, which is becoming more and more of a sort of crystal ball concept. And I think, with COVID, I think, as Thomas used that example from Obama, I think it's a great example of companies actually having to wake up and say, what are we not doing right here? And what we found that often companies work in silos. So there's this lack of communication between the different departments. Everyone has their own KPIs. Everyone has their own agenda. Sales say, I need to reach my targets. I don't care how much stock we carry. And I think this is really going to change the landscape based on this, because we all realize if we don't all work together, we're not going to manage this, because we need to be agile and we need data, we need information. You cannot be running a business now where you're just putting Excel spreadsheets together. I don't know how long all of you have been in the business, but I remember when I started, I was writing it with pencil and rubbing it out with an eraser, and ending up with a hole in the page. And I said, "Why are you doing this?" And I came in and I said, "Let's just use Excel." And Excel is always the go-to software that everyone runs to. So when we digitize our business, we also have to be careful we don't digitize the process we already have. So what businesses often do is they say, well, I've always done it like this, so I'm just going to copy paste it into digitization, choose some nice software, and everything is going to be hunky-dory. And they realize they have those long runs. So Thomas, you spoke about it, where the production says, my cost per item is going to be really low if I run for 4 days or for a week, and I don't care if sales need something else, because it should be about the customer. What does the market need? And digitization, I think, has also been exposed as to if you digitize, is it working for you? Were you able to find out immediately how you're going to manage this? We know that during level 5, where we just talk about how South Africa handled it, and let's call it the full shutdown that maybe the UK is experiencing now, you don't know a lot of things. You don't know when the borders are going to open. You don't know, once you get your truck to the border, is it even going to get across the border? You don't even know if someone's at the customs and saying, okay, I'll let you bring the goods in. And they could be perishable goods, or they could be medicine, which are really important for the people of that country. So I think what we have to do is work on what do we know and what can we control, because there's always going to be many things that you're not going to be sure of and you're not going to know. And often supply chain are looked upon as sort of a customer service department. And I think this is a huge opportunity for supply chain to show how important they really are, because supply chain normally know everything about the business. They have their finger in every pie. You can ask them anything about the business and they will know. So the digital side of it, where putting weighting on cuts into process and cuts into people. You will find also that there are people that maybe are not coping, or you're setting them up for failure because of the fact that you've given them a process that doesn't work, and they're looked at and said, well, it didn't work because of you, and maybe it could have been the system. So I think COVID-19, as much as it's been quite negative, I think it's been really positive for the supply chain community. And everyone is being forced to rethink how they do business from a people, process, and technology perspective. You will know if you made the right choice now based on what technology you have implemented, and you'll know that you're in trouble if you still have a technology that's 10 years old or even 5 years old, or you made the wrong choice. Thank you.
Awesome. Hey, thanks, MJ, and thanks to everybody for weighing in on that. And it doesn't surprise me, given our brief chat before this panel, that everybody's happy to join in and communicate and debate the various issues. One of the things that have really interested me, we've got a consulting business, M&A and transformation, business, our consulting business from here in Dubai and right throughout Asia and the Oceania. One of the big ticket items for us at the moment, we're getting a lot of pull from clients, is transformation. I mean, let's face it, everybody's in transformation, whether they're riding high on e-commerce and whether it's the shipping companies managing their capacity and doing very, very well out of their margins and all sorts of things going on there. The aviation, of course, is on the other end of the scale, where there's just been massive downturn and disruption from the negative side, unfortunately, there. But one of the really key things that's interesting me, of course, is nearshoring, reshoring, resizing, reshaping that we hear so much about in the supply chain. And of course, it is fantastic in terms of if we're looking some silver linings from a very critical and disruptive situation whereby supply chain, as you were saying, MJ, has a much higher profile now. Everybody knows more about supply chain. So at least it's a big, strong positive, especially from a consumer point of view, understanding the importance of supply chain. So if we talk about reshoring, nearshoring, Thomas, I'll throw back to you on this one. What are the implications there? We hear about everybody's going to be moving from China or from this country to that country and getting closer to their customers, what have you. But what are the realities and the implications in the geopolitical world that we live in today?
Yeah, sure. No, that's a big question, and one that not as it's not entirely new to us, and certainly in the United States. We've had a president over the last 4 years who's been causing quite a ruckus around the world, and tariffs as a manifestation, and many companies have been faced with the circumstance of realizing that maybe they were overly dependent on a locale, namely China, and certainly the tariffs have forced some companies to think about a China plus one strategy. I know in the apparel industry, many companies had already have already made overtures of not being entirely dependent on China and move operations to Vietnam, among others. With regard to the reshoring, nearshoring notion as it applies to the United States, I think there's going to continue to be study of the composition of our supply chains. And by the way, that's a supply chain 101 premise. If you're going to manage the supply chain, you should understand who makes it up, not just who you buy from directly and who you sell to directly, but further upstream. And certainly this pandemic crisis has illuminated the need to kind of shine a light in the dark corners, understand where things are coming from beyond tier one. And what I'll tell you, just some experience in the apparel industry, is you might move your production out of China, but what happens when the silk that goes into that tie comes from China? Have you really gained any degrees of freedom by virtue of moving assembly out of that location when you're still dependent on raw materials there? You might have gained some flexibility, but not much. And so realistically, I don't think that we're going to up and move our supply chains around. This has been 30 to 40 years in the making. Some very good reasons why it happened, and certainly the Chinese government's been very effective in building that infrastructure. I don't think that you just kind of snap your fingers and relocate. And the question I've asked, in the United States, for instance, a lot of questions about personal protective equipment. When we ran out of that back in March and April, Americans were like, why can't we make this stuff in the United States? And we do make some of it, just not everything that we need. At the end of the day, these are all privately held companies for the most part, looking after their own best interests. Is government going to step up and subsidize the cost difference in producing in the United States versus China or somewhere else? I'm not seeing that. So unless our government decides they're going to come along and subsidize all the industries that they want to relocate to the United States, I just don't see it happening. I do see in the United States, Mexico being a huge winner out of this. I do think a lot of companies are going to look to bring operations closer to home. But in terms of moving our supply chains wholesale, like I said, it took 30 to 40 years to get here. It could take 30 to 40 years to reverse it. And frankly, I just don't see the winds blowing just that strong on a sustained basis to make that happen. I've got some strong opinions about that, but I'll save those for later.
I've been trying to hold my tongue myself, but you make an excellent point in terms of Mexico, because I've had some clients that have business partners in Mexico, and they were watching this election very closely because their buying decisions was based on the election. So that's one thing that you're going to see a change in supply chain relationships, supply chain collaborations with the new administration coming in January. Another thing in terms of the term, Kim, transformation. I think that the term transformation is essentially, a buzzword, somewhat overused in my opinion, in that coming from a management consulting who implemented ERP systems, that's when you say digital transformation, in most cases, organizations have to get their house in order first. From a data perspective, they have to clean their data. They have to ensure that their people are ready for this transformation. Because I've had the hard. It's not configuring a system. It's not training the people. It's the organizational change is the problem. And I think that this nearshoring is exactly the same thing. Are our people going to be ready to nearshore? Do we have the resources in the U.S. to bring manufacturing back to the United States? I teach supply chain management, and I have organizations coming to my office saying, "Justin, we need people." He said, these kids don't want to work in the warehouse, and that's true. And because we in the U.S. we're having those people who worked in the warehouse for 30 years, their entire careers, leaving the industry. These organizations are struggling to find people, and some of them are dependent upon automation to continue to operate. So the whole nearshoring thing, I think that you're going to have to see, do we have the workforce to support this nearshoring in the U.S.? And that's a big thing that I think that Thomas and I is going to have to collaborate on some research on that one.
Let's do that. Let's talk about it.
And I think there's another argument that says, well, nearshoring is great because it's going to shorten the logistics networks. But also don't forget, we've spent the last 10, 15 years globalizing, onboarding, connecting to suppliers in China. Now with COVID, there are many distressed companies both in Europe and North America. So I think we're going to get to a stage where we'll see maybe reverse globalization, where China is actually expanding because they're buying up companies in North America and Europe, and they're getting a footprint. So Foxconn is a great example, a company looking to expand in North America to shorten their supply chains. You mentioned Mexico there, which is a great example. So I think we will see China expand. But one of the reports I saw back in March from the Institute of Supply Chain Management said that one of the key challenges that those companies had in relation to China was just getting information from their Chinese suppliers. 57% of Western companies said that they had a lot of challenges just getting information about the status of their supply chain and their suppliers in China, because they weren't connected, they weren't digitized, and they were using a lot of manual paper-based processes. So I think, if nothing else, as I said previously, this is going to force the hand of companies to rethink their digital strategies, even more so now, to be better prepared for the next disruption.
Yeah, thanks, Mark, and thanks everyone. I think everyone's bringing really good points, and being a South African, maybe put a little bit of a South African swing on this is really, we had a not such a nice announcement this week, so we're going lower. I don't know what comes after junk status as a country. But the economics of this whole COVID-19 pandemic, I think, is going to have a huge impact also on the geopolitical landscape and what's going to happen. So what you'll find is, if we look at South Africa, for example, I remember 30 years ago, there was a lot about buy local. We had these stickers on the back of our cars, and I think those stickers are going to reappear again. So to try and build the economy and to make sure that South Africa can get back on its feet, I think there's going to be a lot of shifting around as to why are we importing butter when we make it ourselves here in South Africa? Why are we getting things from other countries? Why do we even need them? And I think there's going to be a lot of thought about that, because the only way for a country like South Africa to recover is actually to invest in the local entrepreneurs. There used to be a huge clothing industry here in South Africa, especially in the Western Cape, and it all was closed down and taken out of the country. Those things need to start up again. to really create employment, to help the people to get the economics of this country back on track again. So I believe that's going to have a huge influence on how we're going to be post-COVID. And I saw Warren asked a little question in the Discuss thing about the post-COVID and the global supply chain. And I think a lot of things will stay global, but I believe a lot of countries will become more local. I think, Mark, with Brexit, you're also having some exciting times there and how you're going to manage your supply chain.
Yeah.
So I think as much as COVID has hit us globally, every single country has been impacted differently, and every country, I believe, will have a different way of coping with it. Just from a sort of an African perspective, I think, we're all going to have to regroup and think, how are we going to manage this? And, how is it going to impact the tax income? How is it going to impact the entrepreneurial space and producing locally? Thanks.
Thanks, MJ. I'll just unmute then. Yeah, got it. I was just looking at some of the questions. Warren, I'll ask you a question shortly. Thanks for asking it. Well, actually, what we'll do is we'll go to the question now, because Warren's just piped up here on the left, but just saying, with the logistical constraints of COVID, how effective can supply chains actually be regarding the global economy? I guess that's sort of been answered. But you're following up with that, Warren, saying essentially, how do we overcome those constraints? Anybody want to talk to constraints just briefly for a while?
Yeah, I can.
Big subject.
Others can go on it. There's
I saw you were hovering, so I wasn't sure.
Interesting dynamics for sure, and I think there's considerable question as to whether or not they're going to be sustained constraints or if they're temporary. One that we're seeing, for instance, here in the United States on our West Coast is immense amounts of container shipping coming into the West Coast, more than even normal during our peak season. And the need to get those containers back to China for more cargo to make its way to North America. And as a result, as I understand it, those containers need to get emptied out and returned. So ships are heading back east with an awful lot of buoyancy, a lot less than they had on the way here, because they're loaded with cargo on the way here and not much on the way back. And we're also seeing surges in transportation demand inland as well. And I think it's resulting in higher prices in the short term. The question is whether or not we do see a return to pre-pandemic levels of capacity. That we saw the blank sailings and unfortunately a lot of companies being under distress, as Mark indicated, in our transportation sector. So something of a perfect storm right now that I think companies are kind of paying out the nose right now for transportation, looking to see if it's going to be a long-term or short-term proposition, but hoping that capacity and supply of that capacity will get to be a little bit more in keeping with the demands that we're seeing.
Good stuff. Anybody want to else weigh in on that? All good?
There wasn't really in that response, but it's a very wait and see circumstance, it seems.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I think that a lot of organizations have, again, they've been agile because, for example, when China was shut down, the U.S. manufacturers had to, for example, Anheuser-Busch was making hand sanitizer. One of the automotive manufacturers began to make hand sanitizer. So we've been innovative, we've been agile, we've been flexible in terms of manufacturing and things like that. So I think that you're going to continue to see that with the restrictions the logistical restrictions. You're going to see people become more agile and innovative.
All good. Okay. Thanks, Justin. Sorry, MJ, you wanted to weigh in there?
Yeah, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the planning side. So Thomas mentioned it earlier, but I think the way you plan your business is also going to have to change, because you have to take into consideration you may have these delays, you may have changes in how you're supplying, getting your supplies in if you decide to go local. So planning is absolutely key here, and the use of artificial intelligence. If you have pharmaceuticals or using antihistamines, when is the season going to start? When is the pollen going to start flying? So all this type of thing is really, really important to really keep up. But we're going to have to keep up, and we all talk about VUCA. It's happening. It's going to stay here. And COVID is what we in supply chain, in the planning space, call the disruption. It's an event, and it's something we need to manage. And that's about, in the future, is how do you manage events in the future? And this is really what it's all about. COVID is not an exception. It's actually an anomaly in your demand, and how are you going to manage it? So if you don't have a good planning system and a good sales and operations planning process, you're always going to struggle when there's disruption.
Good stuff. Okay, thanks for that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do some quick fire questioning of all of you, keep everybody on their toes, completely left field, and you're going to have probably 30 seconds, no more, to maybe a minute to answer the question. Okay, and I'm going to ask the same question of the four of you. I'm going to be 2 or 3 different questions. Okay, so there's quite random, but some things that have been asked of me in our practice, more around the consulting practice and the executive search practice that we run globally. So I'm going to start with you, MJ, since you're just speaking.
Okay.
We've seen a lot of carriers, especially the ocean carriers and also last mile carriers, to not mention any names, have made spectacular profits in the last year or so. What's your reaction to that?
I think in a situation where we have a pandemic, I think companies need to be fair, having fair pricing. We've seen a lot of price hikes that have been happening also here locally, where sanitizer suddenly tripled in price. So I think companies from an integrity and ethical perspective cannot be charging big prices. As much as I understand they've had delays and maybe there's empty containers going around, but I think companies will also fail in the end. If people won't use them anymore, they see that that's the way that they work during a crisis.
Okay, Tom, thanks, MJ. Thomas, same question. Big profits been made, very short period of time, much more than budget in many cases. Right or wrong, good or bad?
I don't think it's entirely bad. I'm a capitalist, so you shouldn't be surprised by that response. But meanwhile, what I would say is stock it away. I mean, while it might be a seller's market today, things can turn very quickly. So while you might have a bullish run here, I think you'd be wise to create that rainy day fund when things get tough again.
Okay, good. Well, and within the 30 seconds, well done. Mark, your pitch on that?
Yeah, I think up until now there's been a lot of movement from a logistics point of view, moving those shipments around the world. But I think the real test of the 3PL carriers globally is how they manage the distribution of the vaccines. So we've got 3 at the moment. How are they going to distribute all of those vaccines, especially the ones that require temperature controlled, ones in North America, for example? So I think that's going to be the real challenge for the 3PL carriers. And I think an opportunity for them to prove their worth as well.
Okay. Justin?
Yeah, I think that the current situation just comes down to supply and demand. Yes, I believe the carriers are taking advantage of the situation, but on the flip side, the consumers are watching. So whenever everything returns to normal, they're going to remember who treated them fairly. They're going to remember who charged the fair prices. So the day's coming. Everything will pan out. I just say that the consumers are watching.
Okay, good call. Thank you. All right, another round of Ready Reckoner questions for 10 points, everybody on the panel. Going to start with you, MJ. Okay, this is a bit of a selfish one because I'm an executive recruiter globally, have been for 30 years. What have you noticed? Two questions. You're going to ask you all one question, then we'll ask you another question. The first one is, what behaviours have you noticed within organisations and enterprises that you deal with, not necessarily your own, but that you deal with? Don't need to identify one or the other. That have you seen that you believe could have been done better during the pandemic? The behaviours that you believe were probably negative behaviours or things that could have been done better during this period.
So I believe it's a lack of teamwork, that everyone was trying to solve the problem themselves, and there was quite some panic. So, let's all run around and try and do what we need to do, but not actually joining the dots. So I think there's definitely a lack of communication, lack of putting together and saying how are we going to manage this. And the impact of that, or the result of that, is lack of risk management processes. So there wasn't a proper process in place to understand what they needed to do.
So the process goes out the window.
exactly.
In many cases. Thomas?
Sure. I'm going to direct that question to maybe what our government could have done better during this time, which was to engage in a little bit of centralized planning and execution. I think, frankly, there was a lack of leadership. People didn't want to make tough calls. But what really should have been done during this pandemic is, hey, when New York was on fire back in March, we direct all resources to New York. Wyoming can wait because the pandemic, the crisis really hadn't reached them. And it's just logistics 101, frankly, that you direct when you have scarce inventory, you direct it to where it's most needed. It's portfolio management, and I just didn't see our government do that. And with regard to the vaccine, I hope that's we learned a very hard lesson with the PPE. I hope that we put it to good work with the vaccine.
Hey, well done, MJ and Thomas. Mark, your view on that? What behaviours did you see that you think could have been done better?
Yeah, I think when you look at from the technology side, maybe companies didn't make use of the technology as best they could. Maybe slightly slower adoption in some countries around the world, but I think if companies rethink their IT strategy as well as their supply chain and keep them in step. We already mentioned earlier on about the importance of the supply chain, and it's now entered the vocabulary, should we say, of the CXO and the boardroom table. I think IT to underpin the movement of information around the world needs to be important as an important discussion as well to have.
Good call, Justin.
I'm trying to limit my statement, but I think that the U.S. listened to the administration without validation. So what I mean by that is our administration was saying, okay, things are fine. We're having very low spread, very low deaths and things like that. But that wasn't true. That wasn't the case. And another thing is that to Mark's point, we did not leverage technology. We waited until after the fact to show the visualizations in China to say, okay, day 3, this happened. Day 5, this happened. We could have did this, and I'm not going to say it could have been prevented, but it could have been a whole lot better than what we're currently having at this point in time. So,
okay, well done. Thank you, everybody, for your responses. Before I ask the next question, we wrap up. I've got Karen Kara here. Sound like a movie star, Karen. Karen Kara, it's a fantastic name. You're in South Africa. How does the panel think the trucker protests that are taking place will affect the long-term longevity of local and import supply chains in South Africa? So I'm a bit agnostic to that. Wasn't aware, but there's trucker protests going on down there, and MJ, you'll be aware of that. But maybe we start with Thomas. How do you think protests like that are going to affect the validity of the supply chains?
Yeah, no, I can't speak authoritatively on that subject, but I will offer that in the United States we've had a driver shortage for many years, even going back to our Great Recession of more than 10 years ago. We still had a driver shortage, and so as things have heated up in terms of demand over the last decade and change, we continue to have that shortage. And we have an incredibly disaggregated transportation market, particularly in the trucking sector. I suspect that's also true in South Africa. And as a result, there's just not a great deal of market coordination that results from it, kind of whatever the market will bear. One thing that I throw out there is that at some point you got to pay for it. And I'm an economist by training, and if you want to bring more people into the labor force, you got to pay them. And I don't think we're going to have autonomous trucks anytime soon. We're going to continue to rely on people. And so you got to resolve those issues. And sometimes it's an economic situation. Sometimes it's a work conditions situation. But there's probably going to need to be a solution across both parts of the problem.
Okay, well, thanks for answering that. We've got 5 minutes, so I hope, Karen, that serves you for getting a response from Thomas. Okay, guys, we've got 5 minutes left. I'm going to get each of you to just wrap up, and the question I'm going to put you on the wrap-up question, if that's okay, is as we're moving forward for other executives and other participants in not only this event, but for the supply chain more broadly, because this will be recorded, what would be the one or two things you will only have 45 seconds each? Oops, 2 minutes ago. No, 45 seconds each. 40 seconds each. What are the couple of things that you believe executives, leaders in the supply chain need to focus on for the next 12 months? Very broad-based question. MJ, I'm going to start with you. What would be the couple of things that supply chain practitioners, leaders in particular, need to focus on to keep their business in good shape or to transform into a better state to cope better moving forward?
Yeah, thanks, Kim. I think leadership is a big word, and it's a very important part of any business, whether it's supply chain leader or the CEO, whoever's running that business. And I think the health check of your business is really important. So this is an opportunity now to do, and it's not about going to the doctor, but it's actually looking across people, process, technology, and finding out how well are you running your business and what does good look like. Often businesses think what they're doing is good, but have they actually gone outside and had a look and see what does good really look like and how do I manage it? So I would recommend that the leaders of the business, first of all, do a health check of their business across those three pillars. Make sure that everyone understands the direction of the business. And if you want to transform, make sure you do change management. Don't think you can just implement something and then not go through the people side of it. So check your processes. Are they working for the current day? Are your people trained properly? Do you have your people in the right positions? Do they need to be educated? SAPEX is an education platform. Do they have the right skills to do what they need to do? And do you have the right technology? And are you using it properly? A lot of businesses have technology and everyone goes back to Excel again. So make sure that your technology is working for you.
And just building on that, I think from my side, we've heard a lot today around global supply chains. I think it is a turning moment for companies to think about moving from on-premise based software to the cloud, to give them that agility, to give them that resilience in their business operations, to essentially give them this manufacture anywhere, source anywhere strategy, irrespective of where their trading partners are or their suppliers. And that then brings on the last point that I wanted to make, is to really think about 100% digitization of the supply chain. If you have suppliers still using paper-based information, you're not going to get that information very easily into an AI platform and leverage that information elsewhere within the business. So 100% digitization of the supply chain, and consider migrating maybe to a cloud-based solution of some description.
It seems we've lost Kim there for a second. So MJ, you and Mark have answered that question. Perhaps we could go to Justin to answer the same question and then end with Thomas.
Yeah, so I would say that my biggest takeaway is to embrace diversity. Diversity is more. I will stop and say diversity is more than just race. I would say that you need to embrace diversity from a supplier perspective. You need to embrace diversity from a workforce perspective. And when I say workforce, I'm talking about people from different ethnicities. I'm talking about people from different age groups. And if you have that, that's going to lead to a competitive advantage. That's going to lead to innovative thinking. And that's going to lead to shared leadership. So now everyone's accountable, and that's going to empower your workforce, and that's going to lead to that increased profitability that you're primarily focused on. So I would say that embracing diversity is going to be very important.
Thank you so much, Justin.
All right, on to me then. So I've been encouraging people to think about 3Ds, data, decision-making, and discipline. And I think it really is something MJ, I think, expressed it very well in terms of leveraging the information that's available and making informed decisions, but also having the wherewithal to and encourage to act. The other piece I'll bring in is to focus on people. I mean, we've been through an awful lot this year. People are feeling pretty fatigued and stressed out. And so those people that carried you through this circumstance, I think we need to hoist them up, put them up on our shoulders, applaud. There needs to be an awful lot of support. And I think also they've been watching the entire time in terms of what you've expected of them. Productivity has been off the charts throughout this crisis, and I think we just need to afford our people an opportunity to maybe catch a breath a little bit and enjoy a little bit of a reprieve. And I think it's also going to be a good circumstance in terms of recruiting new talent into your organization if people see that you're treating individuals with respect. And So I'll just close with that.
Awesome, thanks. Sorry, I dropped out the power outage here in Dubai. I just got back, so thanks for carrying on. Whoever carried on, is everybody else wrapped up, or is somebody else going to finish off?
Around.
You've all just about wrapped up on time. Yeah?
You didn't share yours. You've been skipping out the whole entire discussion.
I got the easy job. Look, what I will say is, look, as well as the executive search practice, I'm an executive coach, and I coach at least a dozen senior execs around the world at any given time on any given week. And well, thanks for that opportunity, Justin. And my comment would be about that. I'd just like to segue straight from you, Thomas, on that. And people are the supply chain. Let's face it, folks. We're running people businesses that happen to have planes, trains, and automobiles. It's not machinery running the businesses. It's not actually digitization or technology or anything else. It's people. And I would just finish on the fact that resonates very, very strongly with me, because everybody that I'm coaching, no matter whether they're a CEO of a global company or a smaller organization, whatever it might be, everybody has had stress. Everybody's aware of very, very stressful situations. There's a lot of depression out there. There's a lot of mental health issues. We've had a number of people on our podcast this year, global specialists in that area. All I would say is really encourage everybody to embrace further what Thomas was saying, and I'm sure others, embrace the people around you. Acknowledge, as you say, lift them on your shoulders. Make sure that you do something special for Christmas, if Christmas is your thing. And if it's not, then other times of year for other religions. And by all means, just reach out and be very individual with your thanks and your appreciation and acknowledgement. And for those who need help, and it's probably 30 to 40% of people have some form of mental struggle going on at the moment, if not more. Reach out to people, make them feel loved, share the love frequency, make sure that people feel included, that they can come to you as leaders with problems, and make the world a better place. I'll quote from my very good friends who are on later on today from Supply Chain Now in Atlanta, and that's Scott Luton and Greg White from Supply Chain Now. Pay it forward, do good, and be the change that needs to be. So those are my final comments. Thank you, everybody on the panel, for joining us. Sorry to the last questions that came in that we didn't get a chance to respond to, but thank you all again, and appreciate your input today. A great panel and fantastic input. Thanks, everybody, and thank you to SAPEX and the sponsors for this event.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much.
I know I will.
Great conference.
So well, stay safe. Have a great rest of the year.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Great job, Cam.